Good afternoon and welcome to the CIES Centre International d'Études du Sport webinar number 7. Today, the title of our webinar is decision taking during the crisis and decision making during the crisis. We are very pleased in this webinar to have important persons from the CIES, the Centre International d'Études du Sport, who runs for now 25 years a lot of activities in sport. Particularly, we have today by the guest some of the key players. So let me first of all introduce our guest. I will start with Veronika Muehlhofer. Veronika is an alumni of the FIFA Master 4th edition. Veronika works as a freelance in the world of sport. She has been previously working for the International Ice Hockey Association, and she's that's one of the reasons why that's interesting to have her presence today. She's member of the Council of the World Rugby. Hello, Veronika, how are you, my dear?
Hello, Pierre. Hello, everybody. I'm doing all right. I'm doing well. Thank you.
So, what is the situation in the World Rugby today?
Well, in World Rugby, much like in most other sports, sports activities and events are currently put on hold, and we're preparing or gearing up to start up again, hopefully in the next fall, and start moving into a new season and a new series of events.
Great. We come back to you in a few minutes. Our second speaker is Professor Denis Oswald, who is the director of CIES, the key figure of this institution. Good afternoon, Denis, my colleague and friend. It's really an honor for us to have you here in many capacities. You are member of the executive of the IOC, member of the International Olympic Committee. You are emeritus professor at Neuchâtel University, and you are still teaching for the FIFA Master. You are the former president of the International Rowing Federation, and you have been as well president of the Summer International Olympic Federations, Olympic Sports. Denis, well, I know that it is a very intense moment and a very complicated moment for all of us. I imagine for you this is a very new period. How are you, first of all?
Well, I'm fine personally, but of course, as you said, it has been a very busy period as far as the IOC is concerned. As you know, we had to make difficult decisions. And also regarding the Rowing Federation, where I'm honorary president, but still helping my federation. And unfortunately, we had to cancel all events, all World Championship, World Cup for this year. We still have a little hope for October European Championship, but it's not sure at all. And if it takes place, it will be the only event that we will have this year.
Perfect. Our third guest this afternoon is Professor Dino Ruta from the SDR Bocconi in Milan, one of the director of the FIFA Master. So in this capacity, we meet very often. And Dino is as well doing since 2 years leading a project in Qatar with the SDR Bocconi, and is a professor of leadership and is linked with the world of sport in this sense is very interesting. His vision from outside. So Dino, how are you, and how is the situation with Bocconi and with the project you are leading?
First of all, thank you for the invitation, Pierre, to you, to the CIES friends. And it's a pleasure to be here with you and to share this, a little bit of contents in these difficult times. As you know, I'm based in Milan, and it's a hot place to be. It's not only a matter of health, but also a matter of morale. I think we are getting back to normal life, although schools and university are still closed. So as you know, we, with the FIFA Master students that I hope can see me, listen to me now, we are doing between Bocconi and Neuchâtel an interesting change of a format of delivery of the FIFA Master. As well, we're doing the same for the Qatar programs. We are building the capacity there for the FIFA World Cup 2022. So overall, the morale is sometimes ups and downs. But the overall the situation, it's interesting. I want to mention this in the education environment. This online, the booming of the online, and this webinar is a sign, is giving us a lot of thoughts, a lot of ideas. So I think this will be something that sport will benefit also.
Yes, well, we are pleased about that. I mean, the objective is to connect and think together. So today I will ask you, my dear colleagues and friends, to tell us a little bit more from inside about what the decision-making process has been and is connected to the field of sport. For a very long time, there was a talk about the independence of the field of sport in the decision-making. Clearly, in the recent period, this independence was not possible. It is very important, probably, to understand a little bit more how the mechanism did work. I don't know which one of you would like to start. Maybe we will ask Veronika to tell us 2 words about the mechanism you had in the decision process in rugby, and then we will ask Denis to tell us about how it went.
Yeah, I mean, as you already introduced, I mean, obviously in addition to this being a humanitarian and economic crisis caused by the coronavirus, this is also for people like us working in sports, it's one of, if not the most challenging time in many years and decades of working in sport. We've had to make some really hard decisions of canceling or postponing everything basically for 6 and 12 months to come during what should have been probably the height of the spring summer season and a huge sports year that should have been 2020. So in my case, this goes from local and club competitions in rugby and other sports all the way up to national, international, and worldwide competitions in Europe, in Asia, the Americas, and everywhere. So it's a painful and sometimes heartbreaking time when your profession is actually to create sporting events as an opportunity for people to get together and celebrate humanity. And now what we've been having to do is to cancel or postpone these kinds of events. So it's really been a time where we as leaders in sport have needed to step up and take unprecedented responsibility. We had to try and create some certainty and reassurance in a great environment of uncertainty and doubt. So we, from the processes I was involved in, we really tried to do this by proactively making the difficult and uncomfortable and sometimes courageous decisions which were necessary to fulfill a certain role we have by leading or inspiring society in the good times and in bad times. In terms of process, we weren't able to kind of let things come at us and react, but in many ways we really had to take a proactive approach and try and get ahead of things.
Thank you very much. So, Denis, you saw it from various angles. I mean, your point of view is very interesting to understand a little bit more about how it worked this period.
I apologize because the phone ringing. That's done. Yes, obviously during my long life as sport leader, I had quite a number of decisions to take, and Some of them were difficult decisions, far-reaching decisions, the kind of decision that prevent you from sleeping well for a number of days. Sometimes you are alone because it's a decision that you have to take as chair or president of an organization. Sometimes you can do it within a group, even if you are sometimes the leader of the group, and you have to show the way. But it's easy when you can share with colleagues your concern, and from the discussion about the different aspects of the decision to take, it's helpful in such a situation to have the support of colleagues. In recent time, obviously, the most difficult decision we had to take, and just in relation with the COVID crisis, was the question of postponing or canceling the Tokyo Olympic Games. And the process was such that it was decided that the executive board, the IOC executive board, which is composed by 15 people, including the president, would be the body in charge of such decision, because the General Assembly is composed by more than 100 people living in different parts of the world. And it would have been very difficult to take that decision with such a large group. We had to make sometimes quick reaction. We had to follow the evolution of the crisis, and it's why the executive board was the body which was supposed to make the decision. In order to make the proper decision, obviously, there are a number of conditions to be met. One is to be fully informed about the situation. And the second condition is not, again, limited to these two, but they are probably the most important, is to be able to assess the consequences of the decision you are going to take. In our case, we started already in January, when it started to be clear that the virus would not be limited to China or to Asia, but was coming to Europe and would affect Europe and the rest of the world. And the IOC created a specific task force for considering the situation of the virus. In that task force, a lot of people were represented. Of course, on the one hand, we had representative of the Japanese government, the Japanese organizing committee, but also on the IOC side, the medical director, the sports director, the person in charge of the Olympic Games. And of course, we included also the World Health Organization, because we wanted to have scientific information. Again, it was essential that we are fully informed about the situation and the possible evolution of the situation to make the right decision. And this started already in January. Then the executive board met on regular occasions by video conference, of course, already at that time. Also because people are living in different parts of the world, but also because of the health situation. And for a while, the World Health Organization was telling us, don't consider yet canceling or postponing the games. We are still confident that until July, we were then in February, until July, situation might be much better, and that it would be premature to cancel the Olympic Games. And of course, we could not do it differently because they were our specific advisors, and people was expecting that we keep them informed. The athletes, of course, in many countries were no longer in a position to fully train because venues were already closed, and so we started to feel that the situation was difficult, but still there was some hope. And if you remember, it's sometimes difficult to go back to that time in beginning of March, but the first measures which were taken by the different governments were limited in time until April, in some country until the end of April. So that indicate that even the governments were of the opinion that possibly the situation will improve quite quickly, and therefore that was why the IOC took the decision to not to postpone, not to cancel the games until we were this advice from the World Health Organization. What change? Maybe I just go to this position, which means that, you know, what we had to take into account was not necessarily the health situation in Japan or in Switzerland, but we had to consider that if we have Olympic Games, we will have people coming from all over the world, and that travel restrictions and etc. would apply, or quarantine would apply, and would make possibly the games impossible. And what changed the situation was when in March, the World Health Organization informed us that there was a quick evolution in Africa, in America, North and South, and that the virus was just starting there, and that there was a very quick evolution, and that we had to consider options, different options than the one we had been followed so far. So maybe I will stop here and continue later in the discussion.
No, it's really interesting to see that element. What was very surprising from outside was how to interpret newly the link between the various actors. And that's what was so interesting. From your perspective as a very interested outsider, Dino, how did you see that impact the leadership logic?
It's obvious that there are two main, big pressure on all the decisions in these moments. One was the health component for both athletes and fans, or even organizers, staff. And the second one was the economic pressure, because as Denis said, decide to cancel or to postpone. Obviously, the impact is also on the economic dimension of the country, the sponsors, the federation, and the overall sport ecosystem worldwide. I wanted to add another component. When I think about making or taking decisions in difficult moments, I always have in my mind a good synonym that is about planning. Because when you say what's the main characteristic of a leader, it's a good planning, the ability to plan in advance. And I want to refer to a couple of examples that impress me, that in a certain way the leaders in these organizations had I don't want to say easy moments, but different from others. The first one is Wimbledon. I think it's interesting, a good example, because based on the information that I collected on the web, they've been paying an insurance cost for $2 million for 17 years. So basically, there was a manager, leaders, a group of decision making that said, instead of investing this 2 million in something else, they invested in an insurance policy that, among the many things, they also covered the risk of pandemic virus, exactly what the COVID-19 was. And then they, with this insurance, they were able to get back, so there's a payout, $141 million. Typically, the revenue of the Wimbledon is 310 million in revenue. Obviously, if you consider revenues and profits, or whatever we want to call, even profits maybe is not the right term, but at the end for them was an easy decision to say, we have an insurance, we cancel this edition, we get the money, we reinvest the money in something else. And the health component is still there, and the economic component was a little bit less stressful. The second example is the NBA, where also among the many leagues, if you think about football is still in a big chaos, but at the NBA level, in the famous agreement between players and owners, they have a clear clause saying that the owners don't have to pay 1% almost for each game that was canceled. And they was also in that case, I want to see the planning component, how much could impact on the overall management of the situation, because leaders like Veronika, like Denis, I'm sure that they had to balance multiple interests, not always having planned something, or maybe having planned but something that is even unexpected. So I wanted to share this first idea about taking decisions. Sometimes the quality of your decision during the crisis may be linked to the quality of decisions before the crisis.
Yes, thank you, Dino. I will start to continue with. We already had a lot of questions, and the first two we had were really pushing on this element. I mean, Valentin Martinsky on YouTube say, well, how do you take the right decision between the clubs and the players and the federation's interests? Very often you have to decide to postpone, to stop. How do you deal with the pressure coming from outside, from the sponsors, from the televisions, from the public, from the politics, from the else possibly? How does it work? Do you talk to other sports? Do you talk to other institutions? I don't know who wants to answer that. Veronika, please.
I could make a start, and I'm sure then my colleagues will fill in a lot more. But that's certainly a very good question, and it's a challenging one. But one big element of it is certainly the dialogue, to seek dialogue with the different actors and stakeholders, you've mentioned clubs and leagues and federation, but of course there's even much more than that. There's sponsors, there's broadcasters, there's also athletes, and there are fans, and there are families and spectators, and so of course it's a whole big universe of stakeholders, and so I think a part of it goes to the planning or preparation element that Dino has mentioned. I think a sport or a sporting body that had solid policies and procedures or contingency plans in place would have had an advantage position starting out. However, as the joke goes, nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. You would never actually expect this unprecedented of a situation to happen. And so while the planning puts you maybe in a really solid starting position, then it really comes down to weighing carefully, I think, the trade-off between the different economic implications for sponsors, for TV contracts, for the clubs, for the leagues, and at the same time, weighing sort of the investment of the athletes or the fans. So the athlete might have been training for a certain meet or event or competition their whole life, or the fan might have invested to take that big trip to the event of a lifetime. So obviously these are all big factors to weigh. And I believe that in the sports world, as leaders and decision makers, we have to come extra aware of these factors and of the gravity and consequences of our decisions, and to work together also within our organization in task groups, as Denis mentioned, and between different organizations, to then make the difficult decisions to the best of our knowledge and of our ability, and of course also of our conscience.
Denis, any?
Yes. Well, first of all, I have to mention that the IOC has consulted its different partners. That means especially the international federations, the national Olympic committees, and even the athletes. So the president has organized a virtual meeting with all the head of the National Athletes Commission. We have Athletes Commission in the different countries, so that their voice be heard from the beginning, and also that they are kept informed of the evolution and of our position regarding the decision which had to be made. I would like to respond also specifically to Dino about the economic aspect. There were, of course, a lot of things to consider, but in a way, and at the end, at that stage, the economic aspect never played a role. It was never mentioned that we may have to pay a lot of money or lose a lot of money depending on the decision. The only concern we had was the health situation and the well-being and the interest of the athletes. It was really the only, and I can say honestly, in the discussion, nothing else was discussed.
That's a very interesting aspect.
Yes, and when even if one member would say, yeah, but that would cost a lot of money, always the president said, this is not for the discussion now. First, we have to make our decision. We have to take into account the interest of the athletes, and then we will see where we come. But this is our priority, or even our only concern. And the IOC is assured, since the games, I think it started 84, all editions of the games have been assured. So in a way, the easy situation would have been to say, okay, we cancel the games, we cash the money that the insurance company will pay, and that's it. But again, we knew that it would be frustration and big disappointment for the athletes who were preparing. And as long as there was a hope that the games can take place, then we wanted to try to play that card. But then, as I mentioned before, we had this warning from the World Health Organization telling us, well, you have to consider other scenarios. And then we started to move towards other scenarios. And the first question, and again, very difficult question, was, can we postpone? Is it for on different point of view, like logistic and so on, is it possible to postpone, or do we just have to cancel because it's impossible to move it for 1 year? We knew that a year was needed, or just a bit less, but a certain time. We could not consider moving it just by 2 months or so. This would have not been the proper decision. And the first question there, to help to answer the first question, was to consult with the Japanese government and the organizing committee. Are you prepared? Do you feel that you might be in a position to do it in 1 year with all the consequences that it means. And there were so many challenges. Just one example, the Olympic Village, to host 16,000 athletes and officials. 16,000. It's a serial building, and these buildings are sold after the games. And of course, some have already been sold, and the people who have bought these apartments, they expect to move to these apartments in October, November, or whatever, whenever this apartment will be ready. So the first question, can you host the 16,000 athletes there or somewhere else? Then you had 50,000 rooms available for the delegates, for the judges, the referees, and so on. And can you book the same number of rooms at short notice for the year, the coming year, etc.? There are many other challenges. The venues, are they going to be available in 1 year? They are booked for other things. The media center, the television center, it's the biggest exhibition area they have in Japan. But this is booked every year in advance, and it's already booked for next year. So can we negotiate with the ones who are supposed to make big exhibition and say, okay, we need it, but can you move your exhibition also by 1 year or so, or do it somewhere else? So just to give you an idea of, it's just a few of many challenges that we have to take into consideration to make that first decision, which is cancellation or possible postponement.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it's very interesting, Denis. Let's have Dino for one short answer, and then any points, Dino, in that, because we have many questions.
Yeah, I think it's important to say that obviously the uniqueness of the Olympic Games allowed them the possibility to think about postponing it. But there are many, I was mentioning the league, or many one-yearly events that basically they have an ecosystem, an implication of a business relationship, reputation, many things. So that obviously the balance, the trade-off is still there. I'm very happy to know and thank Denis for sharing that the only goal, the priority was health. Reading the newspapers, we see that the place where there is the higher probability of contagion is work. And so people that still keep working for one reason or for another, they facilitate the contagion of this COVID-19. So it was a good decision to postpone. Unfortunately, for other sport events, leagues, and other competitions is slightly more challenging, considering the cost and revenue structure that they have.
Yeah, and on that we had a question from Marc Dubois, who said, just, I don't think we should answer too much, but if somebody, what do you think about France's government decision to cancel sports league, particularly League One, for the next season? If it's not taken by the sporting authorities, but directly by governments, how does it work? What do you think about it? Any comments?
But quickly, I won't continue, and then I leave the floor to the others. So I think that in that situation, the still football is playing a key role in Europe. But at the same time, there is no one single voice. So UEFA is trying to say something. All the leagues are a little bit connected, sometimes disconnected in another moment. For instance, in Italy, Serie A is looking at what the Bundesliga is doing. So there is not one clear direction. Obviously, maybe this is also, it's not a critique, it's just a matter of fact. And there are a lot of fears And in my only concern about certain decisions that sometimes were taken a little bit too early. So let's wait. A good leader. We talk about leadership, so leadership, taking decision. Sometimes you have to take the decision in the right moment. And in still March and April, the situation was still a big chaos. So I think I want to come back to a keyword that both Veronika and Denis mentioned, is dialogue. Dialogue with all the parties, taking the right time, and then you communicate your final decision. I think it's important to have the timing of these things. And this is why maybe what Ligue 1 did appear, maybe it was totally right, but maybe it appeared a little bit, not in the right timing.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if any comments. I mean, we can move to the next question if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, no, just to reiterate, I think Dino's point is really important on the timing, which Denis also mentioned when it came to the postponement of the Olympic Games. In this crisis, especially in the beginning, everything moved so quickly that many organizations felt pressured to take a very early decision. And of course, at the same time, you cannot wait too late because people, athletes, fans, company sponsors are investing heavily in these events as they come closer. So finding that golden right time is very challenging, but really important, especially in a crisis like this.
Yeah, and in sport, of course, especially the athlete, the national federations, they were expecting clarification because the uncertainty is of course difficult, and they wanted a decision to be made. But there are again different aspects. Dino was talking about insurance. I have friends who organize a music festival, and they were pushed to cancel it, but they could not do it, or they didn't want to do it until they are told by the authorities, you have to cancel it, because otherwise the insurance would not have paid. Because if they do it, from their own decisions, before they are forced to do it, the insurance could say, oh, it's your decision. It's not a decision which was imposed to you by the authority. And I know in another big sport and big world championship, which was cancelled, which is ice hockey. I can say that because the president explained me the situation. They also had to wait until they are forced to say, we cannot do it, to be sure that they would recover something from the insurance companies. So now always a good timing, but the timing may be influenced by external factors as well.
It brings us to the question of Fabio Figueiras on YouTube, which is very interesting from this point of view. He said this pandemic took us by surprise, I would say. Taking that in consideration, are we now more prepared for such type of crisis, if we ever have to experience once again? Do you think the world of sport has understood a little bit different scenarios, or you're not very convinced of it? Denis?
Yes, I mean, apparently such crisis happens only one every 100 years. So it's difficult to prepare and to be prepared for something which happens so rarely. And but certainly, at least for a number of years, and people might forget, but for a number of years, sport but all those who have been impacted by this crisis will have this in mind and take it into account, and a number of elements will be different in the future.
Great. I will go to the next question because we had a lot from Stanislav Stipkov, who will be one of the next edition of the FIFA Master. Hello. Where do you think is the balance between self-preservation and opportunity taking for sport organization in crisis such as this one? Well, Denis, I think it's back to you. Oh, Veronika to start with.
Sorry, no, I was just going to actually mention this earlier, so it's convenient that this question came. As Denis mentioned, for the IOC, the financial considerations weren't a primary in postponing the games, and then Dino already cited some examples of maybe one-off events, yearly events, but that might actually be a big consideration. So for me, this goes further to a point where I think, depending on sports organizations, some smaller sports or smaller sports organizations, unfortunately, they're not in the same position of being able to say finances aren't a part of the considerations in this. And as mentioned in the question, they also have to look at self-preservation. So obviously, health and welfare of athletes, of spectators, and of the communities was always the number one priority in the decision making when the crisis arrived. That's why all sports halt their activities pretty much right away when it became clear that this was not tenable from a health perspective. And certainly my sport, rugby, but most other sports then encouraged all their stakeholders to follow government directives, namely to stay at home, to do what was necessary in the pandemic. But now in the second instance, now that this first priority is looks like it's being overcome, many sports organizations will have to look at surviving financially and maybe coming out of the crisis stronger by changing the way they do things, as Danny mentioned, by looking at how they run their sport and they manage their sport. And if we want to preserve a certain diversity in the sporting landscape without just preserving the main sports of football and such, then I think a lot of these organizations will have to look at how they can survive and maybe also a profit coming out, not from the crisis, but following the crisis.
Yeah. I mean, center and periphery are becoming really big issues. Dino, please.
No, I want to mention the fact that starting from this year in the FIFA Master, we are teaching a new course as a part of all the CIES incredible work and effort with all the 3 universities to redesign the program. And we are teaching sustainability in sport. So I think as a consequence of this crisis, obviously, is to think about it in a sustainable way. So the 3 pillars of sustainability are environmental, social, and economic. So economic sustainability. So basically, the idea is we need to think ahead, also asking ourselves, maybe it will not be another virus, maybe it will be another type of crisis, that another kind of shock that can create a little bit of problems to the overall sport ecosystem. So we need to ask ourselves a few questions like, I don't know, maybe too many games in certain space, too many competitions at the same time, not clear governance. Again, there are too vague, too generic questions that are not applicable to all the sports or to all the events. But I think this is the right moment to think ahead. I've read also, and this is comes back to you, Pierre, in the last days, a few books about history. I think you can teach us something, obviously. But after the big wars, obviously there were people that were damaged by the war, physically or economically, and some others that were not. And those that were not damaged had the time to maybe to gain a competitive advantage, to innovate and to generate value right after the war. So if this is like many books and papers are saying it's like a war, I think there are certain sports that can take an advantage, can think ahead and just not thinking about the health and the virus, but thinking more 360.
Mm-hmm. Well, the case of the two post-war Olympics are very interesting. Antwerp in 1920 and London in 1948. It was really post-war Olympics. The idea of putting money not as a top issue, but as the idea we are together, and Secondly, we will try to spend less to show more unity than spending. And it probably will have some impact. We have very, very many more questions. I will start with our colleague, Calicia Gregoire, who works on our project, CIES project in Trinidad and Tobago. And Calicia is asking a question from a psychological point of view. How does it work for decision makers? What was the psychological impact on you as a decision maker, part of the decision-making process of the crisis? How did you think about this psychological impact it may have had, Denis, when you made the final decision?
Yeah, there is a psychological aspect for those taking the decision, but you have also to consider
absolutely
the psychological aspect for those who are expecting a decision from you. And it's why the question, you probably heard or read a lot about athletes who were complaining because the IOC had not postponed the games yet, and so on, because they, as I said before, the uncertainty about the future was difficult for them. But on the other hand, a number of athletes were saying, well, I've prepared, I've made a specific winter training to be in top form at the time of the games. I'm not sure I will be able to do it again next year, to motivate myself next year. So there was the psychology of the people concerned, mainly of the athletes, was different from one person to another. But whichever decision you had a feeling at a certain stage, whichever decision you made, you will be criticized, and that's difficult. But generally speaking, at the end, everybody agreed that the decision made was reasonable, and even the athletes, even those who were a bit disappointed because the games were more or less next door, were coming in a few months, and they'd been preparing. They accepted the decision because they realized that it was just impossible to do it differently. So at the end, with all the elements we had in our hands, it was a disappointing decision, but it was not very much, it was not anymore a difficult decision to make, because it was too obvious that we had no choice at the end with the information we had. And it's why I mentioned before, to make the right assessment, to make the right decision, you have to have in your hand all necessary information.
Great. I will take one more question, and then probably I will ask you for conclusion. So one by Maximilian Wege on YouTube says sport-related employment in the European Union amounts almost 3% of the total EU employment. Why do you think that governments nevertheless hesitate to support the sports sector financially in their decision-making, we may say, at the moment, in helping in the recovery?
Well, for me, from what I've observed, this differs greatly. Of course, in the very first response, governments had to address the most urgent and pressing structural issues to keep their countries and economies alive somewhat. But I have found that in the second instance, and now as some countries start to see their way out of the crisis, actually the importance of sport and the arts of these type of sectors has been acknowledged, and that the countries are supporting it. I think that most Western countries certainly, and I know the case for Asia is similar. Most governments acknowledge the cultural importance of sports in society, and so they are now finding ways to support it. And of course, I'm sure Denis can tell more about the IOC supporting these efforts as well, and is strongly involved in making sure that the diversity of the sporting landscape is kept alive.
Yes, as far as I know, in many, at least Western European countries, decision has been made by government to support sport. Of course, when you are involved in one aspect of society, it's never enough. But I think the government had to balance the interest of the economy, the interest of the culture, interest of sport, and uh, I think they did what they could. At least I can say in Switzerland, the sport has been supported. The sport was asked to make a proposal of support and explain where it was needed. It was not necessarily needed for FIFA or UEFA because they have their own reserve, for example, and the IOC. But there are other clubs, professionals, semi-professionals, and amateur sport as well. And decisions have been made to try to cover all these aspects. And of course, it will not cover completely the loss, and but at least it's a help which is quite welcome by those concerned.
Well, Dino.
Oh, very quickly, just listening to what we are saying, we are all saying. I think it's important to understand the boundaries of sport, because obviously in the first part we are talking about professional sport. We are talking about main events, national and international level. But I like to see sport also when we think about gyms, wellness. The possibility to practice a sport. So maybe it's not pro sport, but it's the practice of sport. And there is a huge industry there. And sometimes it's important to have, the young talent. It's maybe the foundation of young talents starts in that kind of facilities. And overall, the health, it's also linked to how much we practice sport. In fact, I proposed in Italy to a couple of newspapers to talk about the impact of the lockdown. Obviously, from the COVID-19, maybe we gained something, but staying always in a home, we lost something else in terms of all the activities. So I want to in this taking decisions, coming back to the government level, it's obviously it was not easy, but I would like to see the wellness component more like an industry. So more like also because many former athletes, they work there, they are entrepreneurs in this industry. So it's the overall ecosystem where we need to see sport again more in a broader way. And obviously then we all will admire champions in the top events.
Yeah, and I think another aspect we didn't speak a lot, but which is to become very important, is the discussion regarding transportation, and possibly thinking on reducing some competition on the size and the distance between the people traveling all over the time, because it's becoming, there is a new vision. I was talking to specialists in this field recently. There are some changes in it. Well, I will leave you one word each. One word is 1 minute each for conclusion before we finish this very interesting discussion. Let's start with Veronika, Dino, and then I will finish with Denis.
Yeah, I think I want to echo or continue from the last point Dino just made, that obviously sometimes we forget that sport isn't just a big professional sports that you can see on TV, but sport is so much more to so many more people and to society as a whole. And so many people have been privately affected by this crisis, and that's people who are hobby athletes, and those are people who have families and they have jobs and they have lost jobs in this crisis. So I think that as various countries start to emerge from the lockdowns and from this crisis, sports will have such an important role to play in providing physical and psychological support to hobby athletes and fans, and in helping to rebuild social life and life as a whole.
Dino.
Yes, I want to use a strange word, especially that is contamination. Obviously, contamination is not referred to the virus, but contamination is about the skills that all the sport organizations need to consider. So curiosity, contamination. I think this crisis help us thinking that we need to be open to interact with other industries. So, and decision making is not just doesn't happen by chance, you know. So coming back to what we said before, we need to plan in advance how we take and make decisions before, eventually during crisis, and contamination with other industries, people that have different mindset. We need to have a smart team, a group of people, so all the decisions should be, you know, higher quality, not be another virus. Maybe it can be another kind of shock, but we need to improve the quality of how we take or make decisions in any organization.
Great. Denis,
Well,
the last word.
yes, as I said, one very important element to make the right decision, the most adequate decision, is to be able to assess the consequences and the impact of your decision. And that you will know only later. And it's why you are always more intelligent after, because then you know it was the right decision or it was not the right decision. And this will apply, we will say next year, depending what kind of games we have. Apparently, a lot of efforts will have to be made to find solution, which were not the ones prepared for the games in 2020. So they might not be as adequate, as good as. We'll have to live with what can be offered, and whether this is good, whether this is sufficient, we'll know only next year. But at the same time, if you want to see the positive side of it, is that it forces people to think differently and find solution where to save money, for example. I've heard already some plans by the Tokyo Organizing Committee changing, shortening the torch relay, for example, to reduce the cost. That's an option, and possibly this might be copied in the future by other organizing committee. So you always learn the lesson from what happens, and in that case, certainly the IOC and future organizers will learn from that lesson. Regarding the position of sports, I think everybody realized how sport is important. Sometimes is when you lose something that you realize how important it is. Sport disappeared from television, or what you see on television is replay of games which took place a number of years ago, and there you lose completely the uncertainty of the results, because you know who won this World Cup, who know this World Cup final, etc. So sport as the live event has disappeared from our screen, and everybody realized how important it is, how much people miss sport, and I'm sure everybody will be happy to contribute to reconstitute the sports activity everywhere in the world.
Well, many thanks for that, and the historian is really happy to hear from you all these elements. I would like to thank very much our panel and to introduce our next week's webinar. Don't forget to subscribe. We will be next Wednesday, same time, 1:30 continental European time. The title will be Stadia Today, Managing the Empty Theaters of Live Sports, and I will have the pleasure to share that meeting again. I thank you all very much for showing us, for your nice question, and I apologize in advance for the question we were not able to take, and I would again like to thank our panel. Thank you very much, and